Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for an insightful session today. The topic Fireside chat with Jeff on ransomware resiliency. We have esteemed guest, Mr. Jeff Benson, and our host, Ravi Lingarkar, who have joined us. Uh, Not taking much time, I will just introduce our company, CISA. CISA is a forensic-driven cybersecurity company trusted by organizations across the globe for securing their businesses with robust preventive, detective, and corrective security services and solutions. Currently, we are engaged with more than 1,000 plus clients, and we are serving to 2,000 plus customers from the past, and we are one of the top 4 global PCI forensic investigators. We are recognized by various top brands such as Visa, MasterCard, American Express, Discover, Crest, and PCI Standards Council. Basically, we are headquartered in India, in Bangalore, India, but we have a global presence from Texas to Kent, UK, from Australia to Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and UAE. Few housekeeping items for today. Today's session will at max last for 45 minutes, with including Q&A session for 15 minutes. All the attendees will be in listen-only mode. So if you have any questions, you can put your questions in the chat window, and we'll try to cover that within the session. And even if we are not able to cover, we'll try to reach you personally to answer those questions. So I welcome our host for today, Mr. Ravi Lingarkar. Ravi is Chief Products and Engineering Officer at CISA. He is based out at US office. He has built many successful security products, and he has been a VP Engineering at security giant McAfee. He holds several key internet patents and PhD in electrical and computer engineering from McMaster University, Canada. Welcome, Ravi. Ravi, I invite you to welcome our guest.
Thanks, Ashwin. So we have a very esteemed guest over here, Jeff Benson. He's a VP at Harris Health and CISO there, and he's got an extremely interesting background working at the NSA. And Jeff, do you want to add something about Harris Health and about yourself?
Well, Harris Health is, we serve the Harris County citizens, and we're the third largest populous county in the nation. And we serve those underserved patients here in the county. Obviously, being in healthcare with COVID going on, we're at the tip of that spear right now with everything that's happening from a pandemic perspective. Also, that includes the cyber perspective as well.
Okay. Ashwin, you want to go to the next slide? So before we start the fireside chat, I just thought I'd go spend a couple of minutes on ransomware and what the situation these days are. So the trend is all upside, and an average in 2021, average recovery cost from ransomware attack is about 1.85 million, and the average ransom paid is about $170,000. And there are many reasons why there's a big uptake. One is because of cryptocurrency. The other is the ransomware tools are even low-skilled people can use it. So there's tools like RAS tools, and that's one of the big reasons why ransomware has gone up these days. And then in 1 week in 2021, the number of ransomware attacks went up by 102%. That's the level at which it's plaguing companies these days. And literally 51% of the companies have been attacked by ransomware, and about 26% have paid ransom. Go to the next slide. So there are a number of ways ransomware gets into the company. It could be through phishing. It could be some malicious download. It could be social engineering, where somebody calls and says they've lost their password, or it could be some vulnerability in the application. So there's a number of ways. So one typical approach ransomware gets into the company is just most companies are connected to the internet, and so that's given. So typically an employee may receive a phishing email, and an employee clicks on the phishing email and downloads some kind of malware that executes on the person's machine. And that malware communicates with the command and control center. And the command and control center may provide different commands to that malware to stay there dominant or and make lateral movements. But ultimately, it may just receive an encryption key from the command and control center somewhere sitting on the internet behind some Tor network. It's very, very difficult to make out where it is because it's sitting behind many hops behind in a Tor network. And once the encryption key is downloaded, the servers and endpoints may get encrypted, including backups. And then finally, a ransom demand is made. And when the ransom is paid, the private key, it's a asymmetric key encryption. So the private key is made available to the company to retrieve all the information. That's one way. It's not the only way. That's a very common way. So Jeff, before we start the ransom fireside chat, is there something special of the healthcare industry that you think is different about ransomware?
Well, from the healthcare perspective, here's what we have to deal with. Unlike the other industries, we're in the business of patient safety and saving lives. So when you look at targeting and what you see out here in the industry, when you look at those targets and healthcare being one of the #1 targets out there, you're kind of at the mercy of those attackers and those hackers out there. Once they get inside and they encrypt your data, clearly you have your electronic medical system, you have all these medical devices, once again, for critical care. You're kind of at the mercy of, you have no other choice if you don't have a good plan. And typically when you look at healthcare, you look at one of those legacy industries as far as some of the equipment that we have, the medical devices, and how the networks are postured historically in healthcare where they're flat. So that gives the ability for ransomware to move throughout your network and your environment very quickly. So they understand that the attackers and the folks, these nation states, they understand how we're set up, and we're kind of at their mercy. So that's why you see healthcare being targeted a lot, because as I always say, cybersecurity and patient safety is a very delicate balancing act. You can't secure too much, because now all of a sudden the physicians, the clinicians can't do their job, and you can't be too loose, because then of course you have all these threats happening and these attacks happening on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. So actually, it's I think it's serious. Denial of service itself, you don't even have to encrypt. Denial of service and not having access to medical records itself is life-threatening, I think, in healthcare. So
yeah, absolutely it is. I know, we have data now that points to a direct correlation between ransomware and cyber attacks, once again, on patient safety and also the mortality of the patients. Last year, Germany, I believe, reported its first death. Then we have a hospital in Alabama also reporting those things, and the list goes on and on and on. And again, there's been a lot of studies again that relates to how organizations behave and how they take care of their patients during and after a cyber attack, and the numbers are alarming. As you've seen in the media with this new administration, there's a laser focus on doing more cyber things to, again, protect against the nation states, and that's great. This is very welcoming. But again, when it relates to healthcare, things are pretty tough. So when you look at the HIPAA security rule and the privacy rule, those things came about in 1996. We weren't talking about ransomware in 1996. The technology was different, and now, you look at this pandemic, we want to go more mobile, right? Everything is in the cloud. And again, as we look at treating these patients, the attackers are looking at what's happening. They know, you can go to cloud offerings and attack there. They also know the endpoints now, as far as everybody walks around with a mobile phone. How do we breach those things? And again, we're at the mercy, as you saw earlier this year. You look at the Colonial Pipeline. While that's not healthcare, clearly that showed the impact of cyber on fuel. Then you look at, JBS, you look at the meat plant. Now you see the impact of cybersecurity on food. So the list goes on and on and on. But when you look at healthcare, again, it's very unique. Again, it's a very delicate balancing act on how you deploy your cybersecurity tools and processes, as well as how you treat those patients.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what I've been told in the last couple of years, the whole ransomware has changed in the sense they actually not only encrypt, but before they encrypt, they exfiltrate the data. So in case the company doesn't pay the ransom and can retrieve the data through backup, that doesn't solve the problem.
No, it doesn't. So again, as you talked about years ago, and clearly the techniques and tactics have changed. These aren't just smash and grab operations. These are very sophisticated threat actors. Once again, nation state, so they understand their targets. So they don't just come in and deploy ransomware. They do a reconnaissance mission, if you will. They get inside. They create beachheads. They understand, what your backup procedures are. So a lot of times, they figure out what those backups are, and they go ahead and make sure once they deploy their ransomware, they're deploying it where your backups won't work. They really understand what's happening, and sometimes better than the people who are supporting those systems. So you're just at their mercy to pay. Now, when you look at paying, obviously it's a very lucrative business. The one ransomware group that took down Colonial Pipeline, I think they made about $90 million or so. They went away quietly, but now they're back. So you look at those types of things, it's about the money now. There's no longer just the script kiddies as they were years ago. They're nation state sponsored. They're making a lot of money. So it is a business model for them, and they know that these organizations are going to pay. And when you look at ransomware and you look at all the data that's out there, there's something that a lot of companies are getting. Just like for your automobile, people get insurance. Now people get cyber liability insurance. Yeah. And what they figured out, the threat actors, what they figured out is if you have cyber liability insurance, you're more likely to pay the ransom, right? Yeah. So again, it's about the business, but of course it's very detrimental and can be in healthcare when all of your systems get encrypted. You can't treat those patients. You have to divert those patients to some place that they can get the right care.
Mm-hmm. So what are you saying, Jeff? They actually do the recon and figure out what is the company capable of paying before making the demand, I guess?
Well, I think, as I stated before, these very sophisticated threat actors, once they find out that you have cyber liability insurance, they kind of, some of this information is public. They can figure out what the premium is and what you're going to pay out, and they target those areas. Sometimes they may take it a little easy on you, as you may recall earlier. And while it's not in healthcare, you think about the city of Atlanta. They actually, when they got hit with ransomware, I think ransom was about $50,000, if that much. But overall, once they started putting all the things in place, they ended up paying about $20 million. So the ransom was $50,000. They ended up paying $20 million or more just to put all the right controls in place. So it varies. You've seen ransomware extortion from maybe, once again, $50,000 to millions of dollars. I think JBS, originally it was like $75 million. But so the demands can be very low to very high. It just depends on who that threat actor is who's targeting you.
So have you seen cases where, what happens when a company doesn't pay a ransom?
Well, if a company decides, and clearly, I'll say from a law enforcement perspective, the FBI, they will tell you, and they give you the guidance, they do not recommend paying ransomware. In fact, I think the Federal Trade Commission came out recently with a memo saying, again, they don't, recommend you pay this ransomware. In fact, sometimes they look at you paying this ransomware as contributing to more cybercrime. But you just have to make sure, if you're not going to pay it, that you're prepared. It's like a fire drill, if you will. You need to practice. Organizations need to practice and understand. Number one, do they have proper backups? And if they do, are they offline or online? Have they tested recovering from those types of things? Going back to also is the workforce trained. When you talk about ways that ransomware is delivered, phishing emails is the easiest approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's the #1 threat vector. Everybody gets email, and these emails are very sophisticated now. No longer are the emails that you can easily discern with bad grammar or misspellings. These emails are crafted very, very well. So you're going to make sure that the people are aware. Make sure you have good backups. Then, of course, make sure that your workforce, especially those cyber professionals, are trained to identify these things. And then of course, you look at how you're set up from an infrastructure standpoint. Do you have those choke points available? Is your network flat? Yeah, if it is flat, do you have alerting tools internally that can tell you when you have someone trying to execute payloads within your environment? And speed is very important. Speed and agility, being able to once again choke off when this thing gets propagated throughout the network. So there's a lot of things that come with that. The people, the technology, that process technology is very important when you look at trying to build a resilient organization against this threat, because if you haven't been hit with it, you will. It's all about how quickly you respond to these types of incidents.
So the other thing I've noticed is if they have exfiltered data, even when you pay the ransom, you're not really sure what will happen to that data.
Right. So that's an excellent point. So when you look at healthcare, back in 2016, the OCR came out and said, hey, even if you get ransomware and you can recover from it, it's still something that's reportable. Clearly in healthcare, anything over 500 records, you have to report. So that's including if you have a good backup, because again, if they encrypt your data and you have to get that key back by paying that ransom, you can't necessarily trust that they will give you the right keys. And again, once you pay it once, they know you're vulnerable. Nothing prevents them from coming back, other than you shoring up your cybersecurity posture and putting the right controls in place.
Say if your company is attacked by ransomware, what typically happens? Who decides whether to pay ransom, and what are the things they need to consider before paying the ransom?
Well, again, when you look at these types of things, and it happens every single day, my team, we track these things throughout the nation, especially we pay special focus to what's happening in healthcare. This is the industry that we're in. But again, these are conversations that you need to have internally from senior leadership on down, from the people who are watching the consoles, the cyber professionals that are doing this. So it's about preparation, right? Having that true situational awareness and being prepared. Because again, it's not if it happens, it's when it happens, right? Is when this happens, what are you going to do? So that takes a strong incident response team. That takes the executive leadership being aware. And of course, a lot of these conversations would include board discussions as well, understanding that when this does happen to you, what will we do? And again, it's all about trying to prevent, right, and minimize the damage when it does occur. So that's understanding where the crown jewels are. When you talk about your electronic medical records, those systems talk about your life and critical life-saving systems. Just truly having a disaster recovery plan and business continuity plan that includes cybersecurity and ransomware, and practicing and making sure that you're prepared, because again, it's not if it happens, it's when it happens, and you just need to be prepared. So those are the things, the guidance that I would say that you have to do to determine whether you pay or not. That would be based on the organization, and of course, the board decision on those types of things. But again, the guidance would be not to pay. But again, it's kind of tough when you're not prepared. Sometimes you have no other choice.
Yeah. So by any chance, how much time do you have before you can make the payment? Is just based on the demand, and there's a panic situation.
Yeah, I think it's really based on the demand, size of your organization. Again, there's a lot of data out there. A lot of organizations, have been breached. There's been some major ones in the news from a healthcare perspective. You look at the one that happened recently out in San Diego, Scripps. You talk about them taking the network offline for about 30 days. Some of these organizations will not tell you truly what happened. but you know, they did have a significant cyber event. And of course, what's a significant cyber event now? Ransomware is typically what's happening. So there's really no timeline. You know, again, I say speed and agility is what really matters. And in that situation, it looks at, you know, from a healthcare perspective, that patient care and patient safety. You can't stay on diversion forever. So you have to get your systems back online, start treating those patients. So no timeline, but again, you definitely need to be prepared for when this does occur.
So are you, when your companies are, you know, attacked by ransomware, are you left your own devices? Is there any external entity that can help you, like law enforcement, anything out there, or you left
Yeah,
your own devices?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of organizations that can help you. You know, I'll go back to having a strong incident response plan. You know, that's the first thing you have to have. The organization needs to have a strong incident response plan, but you also need to understand, once again, you know, having those partners out there. You know, clearly your local law enforcement office can help. Clearly the FBI can be involved, and I always suggest that you keep some, you know, incident response company on retainer as well. There are a lot of companies out there that offer services, you know, what we call your fly-in package, if you will. You know, you send up that balloon and they come in and they help assist you. But from a law enforcement perspective, definitely the Federal Bureau of Investigations, they like to be notified when you're trying to have this type of extortion, because clearly a lot of these things can be from a national security perspective. You know, so, largely they're, you know, foreign nationals, these foreign really sophisticated threat actors that are doing these types of criminal acts, if you will.
So Jeff, if you have a list of things a company can do to potentially protect themselves from ransomware, what would be the number of things they can be proactive and do those things?
Well, the number one thing I would say is build a strong cybersecurity workforce, and that's just not the folks who are actually watching the systems and putting in the right detection in place. I'm talking about education from the top down. That security team, that security awareness training brings about strong situational awareness to what's happening, right? You know, because we see it in the news every single day. Everybody knows something about cyber attack now. Everybody knows about cybersecurity, unless you're under a rock someplace. So everybody knows that. That's the number one thing. But again, leadership needs to be aware, and it needs to be part of the business plan. Again, this is not just a technical piece here. Cyber is part of the business. So when I, you know, advise and I talk about this to other organizations, you know, that's the number one thing. You need to have a plan. The management, the leadership team from the top down needs to be aware. And you need to, again, not only have these things in place, you need to test them, right? You know, when I talk about incident response plan, we're talking about tabletop exercises. You know, tabletops also gives people awareness as to what they should do, the impact. You know, when you talk about financial, reputational, and also harm in healthcare, is very critical, because that's the number one thing. How long is it going to take us to get these life-saving systems back online? How long is it going to take for us to be able to treat our patients? Who's around us that we can divert these patients to? Now, when you think about the pandemic world, when I talk about you know, patient safety, clearly a lot of hospitals have been overloaded. You know, they've had to divert patients to you know, surrounding hospitals. Sometimes they can be anywhere from 5 to 100 miles away. We've heard all the stories. But that same type of practice goes very well in the cybersecurity world. You know, as this pandemic has latched on us since March of last year, the cybersecurity world has not slowed down at all. In fact, the threat actors are taking advantage of a pandemic being happening. You know, everybody's looking over here and taking care of all these patients and trying to save their lives. Well, you know, they're sending emails talking about, hey, here's a vaccine, you know, click here. You know, here's some federal dollars for you, you know, if you click here. And they're just, you know, they're just running rampant as well. So it's a you know, what we call a multiple front that we have to fight. So while we have the clinicians trying to fight and save the lives of the patients, we're also behind the scenes trying to fight and make sure that these systems and these networks aren't being overrun from cyber threat actors and also ransomware and things of that nature. So it's a conversation that needs to continue to happen at the top of the organization.
So Jeff, let's take a few, say 30-second break, and there's a poll question, and so that the audience can reflect on what we've been speaking. Ashwini?
Ravi, can you recite the questions for the audience?
So how would you rate your organization's ability to detecting and blocking ransomware attacks before it exfiltrates sensitive data? So while the audience responds, Jeff, do you do any regular threat hunting within your company?
Yeah, that's something that we've been doing quite some time here. You know, we like to have true situational awareness, so we certainly do that.
Mm-hmm. So other than training and threat hunting, do you identify insider threats, people with administrative rights? You take precautions?
Yeah, that's all part of what we look at from just a cyber hygiene perspective. We look at all those things you just mentioned. Clearly, I always state that the ones that can hurt you the most are the ones that understand and know you the most. So we definitely keep the insider threat on our radar as well.
So it looks like the audience, 64% do something to proactively monitor and hunt for threats. That's a good sign. It's probably a lot higher now because people are aware. So that's good. So Jeff, continuing, so there are a lot of suppliers to your company. So do you actually do something over there to all the suppliers? Like you see the incident of SolarWinds, you acquire software that's been.
Yeah, so the supply chain, clearly, as you stated, SolarWinds was all over the news last year around December. It continues to stay in the news because there's still a lot of residue, if you will, that has not been cleaned up. So supply chain clearly is a very important topic here in healthcare and what we do. So when you look at that, that's part of what we would call that third-party risk. So we look at all of those things from where things are being manufactured to what distribution centers they're using to if they have some tech outside of the United States. So that's all about mitigating and managing that third-party risk. We think we do pretty good job at making sure that the business is aware that whatever happens here, it does have a cyber component on it, whether they believe it or not. Because when it comes to supply chain, as you look, we're talking about the mask, right? Yeah, the N95 mask. When COVID first hit, you look at getting phishing emails about, did you need any of that type of gear? Click on this link and we can give you a reduced price. So that all goes hand in hand for us from cybersecurity. But yeah, supply chain is very important, and we keep our eyes on that as well.
Yeah. I've noticed SOC compliance. Now there is supply chain also can be SOC compliant. I think there's a category of there. But what do you suggest the governments do to help companies?
You said what I suggest, what with the government?
And what would you advise the government of all the countries around to action?
Well,
what should they take to help mitigate this issue?
Well, one of the things is, again, you have to take a holistic approach to looking at, risk, right? And again, while, I'm the head of cyber, it's just, cyber touches everything, right? Because as we move more into, getting everything faster, you look at telehealth, right? We went from in-person visits to everybody's going telehealth, televisits, and that capability had always been there, but of course the pandemic forced everybody to start using it. So that was a great thing. But when you look at those things, yeah, it's easy and convenient, but there also there's risk with everything that you do in cyberspace, right? So the suggestion is, look before you leap, right? Again, we work in a very heavily regulated market, right? Once again, you look at HIPAA and you look at privacy and the security rule. Those things have been around for a while. They have not changed, but certainly everything else has changed around them. So we have to adapt and adjust our controls to what faces us. So the organizations need to be resilient, and they need to look at those professionals, those cyber professionals, those risk professionals who are telling them, hey, here are some concerns that we need to address, and here is how it could impact the business. Because again, it's all about these business risks. When I look at cybersecurity, is a business enabler, and cyber should be sitting right at the table along with the finance folks, right? The marketing folks. Cyber needs to be at that table because everything that they want to do, once again, by and large, is online. And while they may not see that, hey, this company is going to host this site, they may not see that that company that's hosting that site is actually operating in a country where the rules here don't apply there. So there's just a lot of things that you need to do as far as risk mitigation that can help. So that's the guidance I would give to them. Make sure that your cyber professionals are at the table. Make sure that you include cybersecurity in your overall roadmap, your strategy plan. It needs to be there, and it needs to be something that's on the forefront. I always say if it can be on the forefront of these world leaders when they're talking about at the G7 summit, they're talking about cybersecurity and having private meetings to talk about these things, definitely should be at the top of mind for the CEOs of these organizations.
Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons for a lot of ransomware these days is because of the cryptocurrency, anonymity of cryptocurrency transactions. Can the governments do anything to regulate those virtual cryptocurrency ecosystem out there? You think that will help?
Well, I think some of that is actually being done. Clearly, it's an area that has exploded, and obviously it's also being exploited at the same time. It is definitely about generating revenue. So I believe the eyes are on that. Clearly, if you look at the Colonial Pipeline, I believe, if I remember correctly, some of that ransom that was paid was able to be recovered. And I may mix up whether it was Colonial or JBS, but nevertheless, the federal government was able to recover some of their ransomware. I think they recovered about $2.3 million of that. So clearly there are some avenues that the government can help with that. But I always put the onus back on the organization. You know, a lot of organizations, they have a lot of smart people that are giving them strong business practices. They just need to adhere and listen to those things. You know, and they need to be aware. You know, I understand they're small, medium, large organizations, but even if you don't have a large team, there's a lot of consulting services that are out there that can help you and advise you about this cryptocurrency, about ransomware and Bitcoin and all of those things that they may not necessarily understand, but there are a lot of people that do understand, and these people can help them when it comes to business plans. And once again, this brilliant, what I call business resiliency, and that's what it's all about, surviving, right? You know, you look at everything that's been happening with COVID, it's our new normal. And with that new normal, everybody has to adjust fire, if you will. Everybody has to adjust and figure out what you need to do now to continue to survive. And there's a lot of knowledge out there how we can move forward, and understand the risks that are in front of us, and again, to mitigate those risks. But the information is certainly out there.
Jeff, one final question before we go to the audience for questions is, so what do you prognosticate 5 years from now, this situation? Will it get better, worse?
Well, I fully believe it's going to be worse. I hate to sound like that. And I say that with a caveat being, it's going to be worse if we don't change, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing but expecting different results. We cannot continue to do the same thing and expect different results. So we can't continue to ignore all these things that we're seeing. We see it in the news every single day. We know it's a phishing email. We know it's ransomware. We can't continue to say, okay, it's happening over there, it's never going to happen to me here. So it's going to get worse if we don't change. But there's a silver lining. And that silver lining is, I think, because more people are aware, and you look at it, and it shouldn't have required this, but because I look at the federal government putting more emphasis on cyber now, talking about staying away from those 16 critical infrastructure pieces, if we start paying attention, if organizations start paying attention, and they start putting the basics in place and starting giving cyber the attention that it deserves, I think we can have a chance to turn this around. But if we ignore all those signs, I think it's going to be much worse, because again, this is a business from a ransomware perspective where they're making millions of dollars. As you put down there before, I think it was 1.4 billion in ransomware. I think I saw a figure just the other day. So far, we've paid about 5.3 billion, and that's what's being tracked. Think about things that are not actually being reported and being tracked. So if 5.3 billion has been tracked and monitored, what about all the folks who are not reporting that they're paying ransomware? So there's a chance that we can turn this around, but we have to pay attention. But if we don't pay attention, it's going to be more of the same, unfortunately.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Let's go to the questions from the audience. Ashwini?
Sure. Thank you, Jeff, for an insightful discussion, and we'll be moving ahead with the Q&A session now. We have received a couple of questions. Just a moment, let me launch those. So first question comes from Chris. Chris asks, what is a good response time for an organization experiencing a ransomware attack? Identify to response and remediate.
The question is, what's the response time?
Right. What is a good response time for an organization experiencing a ransomware attack?
Well, I would just say immediately, but there's a lot when it comes about what's a good response time. That mean time to detect and mean time to respond. So you have to look at those numbers as well. When did you detect it? How quickly did you respond to that? For example, when you go back, and although it wasn't ransomware, when you go back in time and look at the target breach, well, they were getting notification, they said, for months. They had alerts going off. They were ignoring the alerts, and finally somebody paid attention to the alerts one day, and then they responded. So I would say, obviously, to be able to detect in a perfect world, detection should be immediate, right? So if you have all the controls in place, if you have all those things in place for us, your end users, once again, first line of defense is going to be your human element, right? So they're trained, they're aware. Then you have the tools in place that can tell you when something is running throughout your environment. So you have to have some ransomware detection turned on, executables, all those things. And then how quickly do you respond, right? Do you remediate it from those systems? Can you lock down? Is your network segmented? So there's a lot of factors when it comes into that play. But again, as I talked about having a strong incident response time, I would say it should be within, I'd say, an hour or so, if with my standard. But I know that's not reality. But you got to have all those things in place in order for you to actually meet those numbers.
Yeah. So I was talking to a customer who's been attacked by ransomware. It's just like for a week they were struggling. They had 4 or 5 locations. All those locations are down. People are not allowed to work, and there was like a CEO in a war room situation on like an hourly basis giving updates. So trying to even the backup systems didn't work. So
they were not prepared, right? No incident response, no tabletop exercises. So it's all about being prepared.
It's always, it won't happen to me kind of thing. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Ashwini, you have any more questions?
Sure. Yes. Thank you, Jeff and Ravi. Meanwhile, we take other questions. I'm launching one on the one poll, and we can continue Q&A session. Let me just launch the poll, and I'll recite the questions on the side.
Yeah.
So we have question from Mr. Carl. Is there a recommended newsletter or some other RSS style resource that a company can follow to stay up to date with new trends and malicious activity and stay informed about new exploits that have been discovered?
Yeah, so there's a lot of information, as far as ransomware guidance that have come from the highest level in the federal government. NIST has put out publications on those things, and far as staying aware of what's happening out there, you look at you can subscribe to notifications on vulnerabilities. The CVSS list, if you Google those types of things, a lot of times you can sign up to subscribe to get notifications when there are vulnerabilities released. And again, Microsoft has been doing it well for a long time. They have their normal security release in the bulletins that everybody knows about Patch Tuesday, but you can always go to their site and look at what's happening in the Microsoft world. But again, go back to NIST, great publications on things that you can do. There's a lot of guidance that's coming right out of the White House on cybersecurity. There's a tremendous amount of data that's out there that can help you shape and be prepared to be cyber resilient and to have really good cyber hygiene out there.
So just to add to Jeff, typically mid and large stage companies have some kind of managed detection and response product or a service. And as part of that, those services get threat intel feeds, and from those feeds you get you can get that information.
Right. Yeah, and there's a lot of subscriptions out there. Sometimes they're free, so you don't get all the details, but they have something out there that call the Information Sharing Analysis Centers, ISACs. They were formed by executive order on a federal level, but they can disseminate a lot of information. I would encourage you, whoever asked a question, whatever industry you're in, you can subscribe and perhaps get a member of their threat intelligence sharing out there as well.
Thank you, Jeff. So one question is from Mr. Raghavendra. What processes do we have in place to ensure we are constantly evolving our approach?
This is for Robbie, right?
This question is asked by Raghavendra.
Okay. Can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry.
Sure. No worries. What processes do we have in place to ensure we are constantly evolving our approach?
Well, again, when you look at the cyber landscape, there's, as I talked about, all of those forms of getting information out there. I don't know what tools you have, but they should be adapting to the changes. So I've been doing this a very long time, over 25 years. And one of the things that remains true is understanding the basics. You work for an organization, you need to understand the behavior of your users and understand your user base. That old saying, who's logging in at 2 a.m. in the morning and from what country and why. So when you talk about evolving your program, and whatever you're doing, first you need to understand, what you have at hand. So, again, with all the publications, all the guidance out there, it can be overwhelming. But, first off is understanding, your organization, your users, the behavior there, and what you have to secure. When you look at the level of criticality, you can't do everything. So you need to make sure you're protecting the most critical assets of your organization. And obviously, that comes from, you creating, a risk matrix, if you will, what's important to the organization and how you go about protecting those things and looking at, okay, here's a gap here. But again, that's my guidance, understanding your organization, understanding their user behavior, understanding the tool sets that you have, and just knowing where the crown jewels are and looking at those types of things.
Just to add to Jeff, there are some programs, machine learning programs, that actually do user entity behavioral analysis and detect anomalies. You can have that part of a service like managed detection and response service. So that's one way to do it. Ashwini?
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ravi. We have a question from Adam. Have you leveraged cloud services to mitigate the exposure of mission critical systems? If so, did it make a difference?
Well, you look at cloud, cloud has been around quite some time. And of course, when I got into doing this, cloud was really for power, space, and cooling, right? It was to offload those things, but now it's become a situation from storage to now adding security. So certainly from a healthcare perspective, we have leveraged some of those things to our advantages. But, again, what we found out is, it's kind of a transference of responsibilities, if you will. While we're maybe moving something off site, it does not remove our responsibility to be able to secure those things. So yes, we have used some of that technology in the cloud, but my guidance is to make sure that you know how things are configured in the cloud, the security in the cloud and of the cloud, and instill your data. So you can't just transfer it out and not ensure that it's protected properly. When we talk about those things, we talk about the SOC reports. What controls does that cloud offering service have? What penetration testing are they doing? Have they been breached? Because everything that looks good is not necessarily good for you. So I would always say go into looking at the cloud security and offering with eyes wide open, because again, that can be just you moving the breach from on-prem to now you moved it to the cloud. So just be careful with those things.
Yeah. Every week there's information of somebody exposing all their S3 buckets in AWS.
Right,
You got to
absolutely.
be careful. So
Right.
you got to put the same systems and processes in place, and educating people.
Thanks, Ravi and Jeff. We have a question from Mr. Higenio. You mentioned incident response. Just wondering what threat feeds or threat intel you expect from your analyst.
That was from Eugenio.
Right, Higenio.
So my expectation is people to be able to respond to alerts. I say it in very rapid fashion. I can't necessarily put a time frame on it, but it's when you're aware. It's to respond to those things and to be omni thinking, right? Because again, as we understand our environments, and this applies across the board, first and foremost, you need to understand your environment, because a lot of these tools give you false positives. So you're going to always be chasing your tail. It's like the story of the little girl that cried wolf, or the little boy that cried wolf. You can't keep crying wolf. You need to be aware of what you're seeing and respond appropriately. Otherwise, you're going to lose confidence of the people that you may be sending this information over to. So the expectation is immediately, as soon as you see it, dissect it. Make sure you go into it with an accurate understanding and report it, and of course to mitigate those things.
Yeah, there's just to add to Jeff again. There's a lot of alert fatigue, so a lot of companies outsource that alert, converting those alerts. Somebody goes and investigates and converts them. Only a small set of them becomes actual tickets. So it's a hard, laborious task, but it's worth doing it.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ravi. We have a question from Jasmine. If I fall victim to a ransomware attack, am I legally required to disclose?
Well, in healthcare, you certainly are. You have to disclose, especially if it's over 500 records or more. Of course, when us being here in the state of Texas, I think it's now gone down to 250. So that's half of what the federal department requires for you as far as HIPAA. So definitely you have to report, and only hope that you've minimized and contained the exposure of that ransomware attack. But definitely we would have to report that. Anyone in healthcare would have to report 500 or more. But again, that OCR guidance says, hey, you have to report, period. No matter whether you mitigated it or not, you have to report.
Yeah, especially if customer data is involved. In most cases, you have to report.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ravi. We have a question from Adam again. Can you elaborate on the 15 components that shouldn't be used? Please provide more context.
I don't quite understand the question. You said the 15 components?
Yes, 15 components.
Yeah, I don't quite.
Adam, can you elaborate your Adam, can you elaborate your question? Meanwhile, we take. It was mentioned by Jeff during the call. Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay,
I may
no
have
worries.
mentioned the 16 critical infrastructure, but I don't recall the 15 components.
Okay, let's take one last question. Uh, just a moment. As an organization, what measures do we take to minimize the damage an attacker could do inside to our network?
So as an organization, again, I spoke earlier about putting all those things in place, getting management buy-in, having a strong incident response plan, having the right controls in place, having the right resources in place, whether that's on-prem or having a company manage your security. But again, ultimately, it's about testing that plan because it's not if it happens, it's when it happens, and you need to be prepared. You need to be resilient. So you also need to have those basics in place of cyber hygiene, as far as, we talk about passwords, but we also talk about multi-factor. There's a new trend that's going on talking about zero trust architecture. It's being pushed. So there's an abundance of information out there to help mitigate a lot of the cyber risk out here. But those cyber risks need to translate to the business as business risks because they see it too far as being technical, but it's really business processes that they need to look at and incorporate this into the business to make sure they're mitigating this risk from the top down. So that's what I would recommend.
Yeah. Just when you get a cyber insurance, they'll make you do things because they don't want to have big payouts. So they'll force you to do things to protect yourself.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ravi. So Aaron is asking question. Probably if Aaron agrees, then we can unmute him and he can ask his question. Meanwhile, I don't see any more questions coming up. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer those. And since we are left with 8 minutes, Ravi and Jeff, just two points. Probably we can summarize and then we can close the session.
So my 2 points is we talk about ransomware and we talk about specifically in healthcare is you again, you need to do what we call, again, cyber resiliency. You need to be resilient to ransomware and all these cyber attacks. You need to put the right controls in place from a business perspective, and you need to get that management buy-in. The next thing I would say is truly awareness, situational awareness. And that's, again, from the top down, but it's that awareness as to what's really happening. We don't live on an island by ourselves. This stuff is happening all around us and a lot of times to us. So having that situational awareness of what's there goes a very long way. So being resilient and also having that situational awareness can go a long way, and applying those things from a business perspective can help tremendously in this real cyber war that we're in, because again, it is a cyber war. We're not winning, they are winning, and you can tell they're winning from the amount of payouts, all these major things you're seeing in the news of ransomware. So they are certainly winning, and we need some wins for us as well.
So from my perspective, I think educating everybody in the company, conducting phishing simulations and things like that, that's one. The other thing is, in case to protect you, you have to build up appropriate SOC operation, either outsource it or build it in-house, and actively look for cyber threats. That would be my comments regarding what we can do.
Yep. Thanks, Ravi. Thank you, Jeff. And indeed, it was an insightful session. Thanks for your time, Jeff. Thanks for your time, Ravi. Thanks to our audience for joining us. Please do join us for our future sessions. We have a small survey post the webinar closes, and we look forward to host you in our future sessions. We look forward to host Jeff as well in our upcoming sessions and events. Thank you, Ravi. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you, everyone. Have a
Yes.
great day.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Ashwini. Thanks, audience.